Good evening. Happy Sunday evening, everyone, or whenever you find this. Welcome. So, tonight we are getting back into The Magical Origin of the Egyptian Temple by E.A.E. Reymond. And we're reading one chapter tonight. It's a long one. So, off we go now. We're going right into part 3. Is that where I am right here? I actually, yeah, okay. I have a bunch of marks in here because I was seeing how many days it was going to take to finish this book out. So yeah, part 3, the second era of the primeval age, and we're going into chapter 9, the origin of the lands used as sacred domains. And it says beginnings of the cult of the falcon. The primeval domain created on the marginal land of the land of trampling, the Wetjeset Neder, appears to be the principal outcome of all the actions of creation which the Shebtu completed in revivifying the island. And from this spot developed a new phase of creation which altered the aspect of the primeval world of gods. It is obvious from the Edfu account that the Shebtu recreated the original sacred domain neither for the Pian god and his fellows, nor for the Earthmaker and his company. Another divine being had appeared in their place. The newcomer in the island of trampling, after this was revivified, is the falcon, the winged one, NDB, and by his first name. As has been said, there are in our myth definite hints of another mythical world of which the island was the survival. It is therefore a logical deduction from the facts that the world of the dead deities became the actual foundation ground of a new holy world of which the falcon became the ruler. The place of origin in the first falcon's domain was not a freshly created land, but a land which originally was that of a nameless god who had funerary associations and who, though represented as a falcon, DRTY, seems to have been an earth god. Hey, Pearl, good to see ya. Hey, JMB, good to meet you. Welcome in. In this respect, all the events which are described at the beginning of the first record, i.e., the emerging of the Shebtu, the revolution of the Ka, and the other DRTY falcons, then the erection of the perch, are incidents and decisive moments concurring in the constitution of the first sacred place of the winged one, the later falcon, in the island of trampling. The idea inherent in the account of this mythological situation is that the cult place of the divine being, who is the god and TR of historical times, derived from the events by virtue of which the vanished world of the Creator was revivified. Only the Edfu texts make known these trends of thought and interpret the circumstances in which it had happened. Nowhere else do we know of a text explaining the reasons and conditions that led to the creation of the cult of the NTR god, as well as the foundation of a sacred place for the newly created cult. For the cult of the falcon, too, the Edfu sources are the only evidence. That the falcon arrived in the island of another and earlier divine generation, and that in that land his first sacred domain was afterwards founded, is asserted in the texts of some ritual scenes found at Edfu. They allude to the belief that the falcon, at Edfu, the falcon Horus, arrived in the land of the first generation. He assumed the protection of some sacred substances described as the IHT only. This idea is also expressed in the text of the ritual episode of bringing the Ankh bouquet of the ISD tree, the ISD tree, which is engraved on the outer wall of the pronaos of Edfu. The spell to be recited by the officiant reads, quote, "Take to thyself the Ankh bouquet for thy soul, O Amun, or O Atum, Horus, the Betatite, great God, Lord of the sky. May thy heart unite with joy. May thy majesty abide in Nejem Ankh, in thy form of Horus with uplifted arm. When thou hast reached the land of the first generation and Betet, thou hast wakened, or rather, thou hast awakened the gods on their seats, end quote. We have no doubt about the possible points of contact with our myth because the mythological situation that can be deduced from this spell fits in with our narrative. It is concerned with the appearance of the falcon on the mythical scene and reflects the same belief, the interpretation of which was only slightly modified under the influence of views and traditions current in historical times. In the ritual formula, Horus the Betotite is described as being equal with the soul of Atum. We see here a parallelism with the condition of the primeval falcon, who is said to have been equated with the flying Ba. There is much that is similar to the description of the arrival of the god in the new land. Horus is said to have reached the land in which another earlier divine generation lived. His appearance awakened them on their seats. The winged one, in our creation story, is found in the same circumstances. He came to the island, which was sacred prior to his arrival, and in which was the sacred domain of the DRTY falcons that had vanished. The arrival of the winged one is, in fact, concomitant. Concomitant? Concomitant. Concomitant? Ah. Concomitant. I think it's concomitant. Let's find out, though. The arrival of the winged one is, in fact, concomitant. Let's find out. How do I say that word? Concomitant. 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 Okay. Naturally accompanying or associated. Concomitant. Thank you. You know what, too? I want to see if I'm like butchering pronouns. Pronaos. Okay, Pronaos. A vestibule at the front of a classical temple, enclosed in a portico and projecting side walls. Pronaos. Oops. Okay, cool. And then concomitant. That girl's voice. Okay, cool. All right, back to y'all's. The arrival of the winged one is, in fact, concomitant with the resurrection of the former sacred domain, which was performed and completed by the Shebtu. We imagine that the Egyptians believed that after the domain itself was revivified and its sanctity restored by the erection of the perch, the winged one appeared. This was precisely one of the reasons why the ancestral falcons were reanimated, were awakened from their slumber, and, as intangible divine beings, came out of the underworld of the soul. The emergence of the winged one, therefore, can be interpreted as completing and consecrating the significance of the creation of the perch. The awakening of the DRTY falcons and the erection of the perch are the starting point of a new era, the second in the existence of the land of trampling. For the falcon, however, this was the earliest part of history of his cult. It was the time of his seat of the first occasion, as we learn from the tradition of a later date. Some account of the planting the perch has already been given. We read in the narrative that the name of the reed, NBI, which is the primeval water, is Jeba. This statement can be taken as decisive evidence that the slip of reed was thought to be planted on the marginal land of the island, and that the first sacred place of the falcon in its primary state was believed to have been surrounded by waters. This description appears to reveal one of the fundamental ideas of the myth, the creation of the god's seat. that seat which followed the former domain of the deity pillars, came to pass on the marginal, or rather on the margin of the primeval waters. This seat was erected within a field of reed, which by its nature was a sacred land prior to this action. Its principal function was believed to be the power WTSNTR, or uplifting, restoring the god. Hence, it is legitimate to conclude that the perch of the falcon was made in the same place as that in which the deity pillar of the defunct Paean god once existed, and that it had the same function as the deity pillar. The perch is actually the substitute for the most sacred emblem of the former domain of the Paean god and Heater Her. That it was believed to have happened in this way is possible because the record does not mention that the deity pillar would also have been restored in the same site after the domain was revivified. Hey, esoteric alchemistic, happy Sunday, man. Welcome in. The significance of the name which the first domain of the falcon bore since then, the Wetjesetneder, stresses the idea that the creation of the first sacred domain of the falcon was conceived as the rebirth and restoration of the vanished sacred place of the creator. From this point of view, it is entirely clear that the sanctity of the place in which the first cultist place of the falcon was to be created was imparted by what had existed in the past and had perished. We do not doubt that the first era in the history of the primeval domains of the falcon can be defined as the time of the recreation of a destroyed world. This mythical event of settling down on the ancestral land is what the interpreter of a later date described as the coming close to the land of the first generation of gods. Our record preserves a unique picture of the way in which the first resting place of the god whose cult survived in historical times was founded. Allusions are known, indeed, to the seat of the first occasion, but nowhere is there any explanation of its nature and appearance, or of the manner and circumstances under which the resting place of the god was created in the primeval age. In contrast, our creation story describes in great detail the origin of a very primitive domain that was believed to have been established on the marginal land of the island of creation. We can attempt to draw an outline picture of the first sacred place of the falcon in the island of trampling. We imagine that the name Wetjesetneder applies to the whole field of reeds, representing probably the extent of the former domain of the earth god, and in the midst of which was the perch. The falcon lived in it together with the ancestral deities, the DRTY falcons. It follows that the first domain of the falcon was regarded as being at the same time the place of the worship of the ancestors. This feature is of prime importance for, as will be seen below, the connection with the ancestors is a vital element in all the phases of creation of the primeval domains of the falcon. It was there, in the realm of the ancestors, that the falcon was adored for the first time as a god by the powers who created his domain, the creators of the earth known in our story as the Shebtu. Hence, the offspring of the earth god are in our creation story the first beings who completed a ritual act of adoration. That this might have been the Egyptian idea of the seat of the first occasion of the falcon can be demonstrated by referring to the reliefs which at Edfu accompany the first cosmogonical record. The falcon ruled in the Wetjesetneder as the Lord of the Perch. Except for the ancestral deities, the Shebtu were the only companions in his first home. The description of the field of reeds in our record may well reflect the aspect of a genuine, though primitive, domain or enclosure in which the sacred falcons were reared in a far distant past. This can be demonstrated by the picture of an enclosure on a seal from the Archaic period. Juicy. Anne, yay! Good to see you, dude. Welcome in. Hey, speaking of this seal, I don't know why this made me think it, but as I was going through this book last night and like mapping out like each day that I'm going to be reading, I did not know, but I learned that in the back of this book, it shows pictures of all the dimensions of the different buildings that they created. Like, boom, right? Oh my gosh, because I was like, as I was reading it, I was trying to figure out, like, and I was trying to formulate in my head, like, like the cubits on this side and that side, and then the two temples inside, and it's so juicy. There's other pictures back here too, which once we get to the end, I'll go in more detail and like share all these pictures and stuff. But dude, look at that. Primitive enclosures, the bull, the falcon. Awesome. I hope you had an awesome birthday, Anne. Sweet. So good to see you. Awesome. Awesome, Alchemistic. I just actually woke up from like a really awesome long nap after work and stuff, but I made it. So here we are. Okay, so the seal, where are we at? Archaic period. Okay, this can be demonstrated by the picture of an enclosure on a seal from the Archaic period. We can see some points of contact between the perch of our myth and the supports depicted on the seal, which might well have been fashioned from reeds or other light material. The description of subsequent events makes it likely that his first sacred domain was regarded as a real center of creation of new lands in which other sacred domains were founded thereafter. All the acts of creation that occurred in the domain of Wetchesset Neder are the eras in which the sacred world of the falcon in the primeval age came into being. The bringing into existence of these new domains was also affected by the creators of the perch, the Shebtu Wa and Ah. These periods of the creation of the earth seem to have occurred only after the falcon was definitely established as the ruler of the original Wetchesset Neder. It is quite evident that this mythical episode formed an integral part of the long drawn out drama of the creation of lands. The record proceeds to describe a mystic act by virtue of which the falcon, as the lord of the perch, consorted with the soul of the Pien god, the flying Ba. We suspect that the picture of this event conceals the explanation of how it happened that the falcon was equated with the former deceased ruler. The abbreviated version of the myth confirms this view. It is stated that by means of this mystic act, the falcon was enabled to unite with the sky of him whose command is unknown. It's like Voldemort. It was believed that only through this act did the falcon become the real successor of the deceased Pien god. Only when this had happened could the creation of the new lands for the falcon's domain be carried out. The account of the events connected with the original domain of Wetchesset Neder in the second era of the existence of the Island of Trampling has every aspect of being a complete history of a primitive cultist's place. If we recall the name of the divine being for whom it was created, the Winged One, we may venture to suggest that there is preserved either an extract or an abbreviated version of what might well have been a single myth about the origin of the place of worship of a sacred bird. This bird might have been later identified with the sacred falcon, and thus the story of his cultist place was adopted and adapted for the explanation of the beginnings of the cult of the falcon. Excuse me. One must not, however, imagine that the domains of the falcon were created in a single action. The narrative enables us to discern several periods succeeding the time of the resurrection of the earlier domain of the Didi pillars and the constitution of the Wetchesset Neder. The second period of the creation in the falcon's primeval domain meant an extension of the actual territory of the island. The origin of the first plot of land adjacent to it, which is described as a pay. At this point, the text is silent about the way in which the actual land of this pay was created. It is only briefly stated that the pay land, DJ-HR appeared on it. From this description, it can be deduced that a land called Pei might have been created in a way other than the island itself. There was certainly a connection between the emerging of this Payland and the activity of the two Shebtu, since they were in the island when the Payland emerged, and are said to have uttered sacred names on that occasion. This picture of the emerging of the Payland may allude to the symbolic and magical manner of creating the earth, the SWIHT, of the nature of which a preliminary account has been given. Since there is no allusion to the making of the earth for the actual land of that pay by an organic process, the earth as a substance, or as the substance, must have been created prior to this action of uttering names and must have lain beneath the water. Our document would seem to describe, therefore, only the second phase of the creation, the emergence of the earth, hidden beneath the primeval water. I just had one of these little papers fall out. 1 second. Un momento, por favor. I think you live here. Yeah, you do. Okay, the primeval water. Okay, let's get a drink here. It's probably not too hot to drink now. Oh, yeah. I went with pomegranate raspberry tonight and honey. No any kinds of, milk tonight. Even though I love that coconut milk in there, man. I was like, not today. This event was believed to have been caused by this event was believed to have been caused by the uttering of the sacred names. This hypothesis receives some support from a brief allusion occurring at the beginning of this narrative. It is stated that there was a great inundation in the fields that surrounded the magical land of the island where the reeds grew. The first Payland to emerge at the edges of the island of creation might well have been one of these fields, since the major idea of this creation myth is not to create something anew, but to reanimate what already was. The Egyptians clearly believed that the actual land of the sacred domains that survived in historical times was brought into existence in a way unlike the origin of the island, and resulted from the activities of divine powers who were not the same as those who created the earth as a substance. This will accord with our previous hypothesis concerning the foundation ground, which the island seems to have been. In the subsequent parts of the narrative, there is other evidence to bear out the theory that the island was a real foundation ground for the lands needed for the creation of sacred domains. The aspect of the newly created Payland was apparently made similar to that of the original domain of Wetchesset-Neder. No detailed description of it has been given. The falcon was subsequently greeted as the lord of that Payland. Therefore, he must have had his divine seat there, which we imagine to have been, again, a perch. A slight indication in favor of the hypothesis might be seen in the allusion to intercourse between the Ka and the falcon, during which the Ka was believed to reveal to the falcon some secret things. That this event had happened in the perch is found to be explained in the tradition of a later date. This Payland had its own name, which seems to have derived from the greeting formula which the Shebtu addressed to the falcon. It appears that following this action, other Paylands originated. In the Edfu version, however, this part of the narrative is presented in a very concise way. Nevertheless, the occurrence of the expression INRN, to say name or names, preceded a series of names which we suppose were recited by the two Shebtu. Then the examination, arrive at this place, suggests that this part of the narrative conceals another allusion to the same magical process of creation. The result of this action would thus be the appearance of other Paylands alongside the marginal land of the island, where other domains were founded in which again the falcon became the ruler. The interpretation suggested will accord with the allusion to the reciting the learned spells in action, or an action, which seems to have been followed by what is described in our document as passing by in view. This expression may describe the appearance of the new plots of land emerging in the sight of the inhabitants of the island. Strictly speaking, the Egyptian theory appears to be that in the second period of the existence of the revivified island, plots of land, the paylands, were believed to emerge alongside the marginal land on which the reeds grew. Their coming into existence is represented as the result of a properly symbolic and magical action. In the third period of this creation story, the Hiwer, the great primeval mound, is said to have originated. It appears that the Shebtu were believed to bring this mound into existence, and again by virtue of uttering spells. On this mound, there seems to have been created a single sacred domain, also described as a Nut, Niwt, or domain, which, however, bears three names. These names may possibly reveal the significance of the mythical events which were believed to have happened in it. From these names, we infer that this mound was also believed to be the territory of the ancestor, who might have been the deity who is described as he who is great of arm. Arm, like a weapon? Jenny! Oh my gosh! Good to see you. Good to meet you. Are you Jenny that I 8675309? I know a Jenny who has a similar name. If you're a different, it is you. It's so good to see you. Welcome in. Long time no see. Bear hugs. Welcome everyone. Freaking awesome. Wow, this is great. This is awesome. Oh my gosh. I think I'm gonna, yeah. I'm excited. I'm excited about the more books to come, about the books that we're reading right now. I think I am going to read another Dolores Cannon book. I didn't even know that she narrated, or not narrated, that she wrote this book called Horns of the Goddess. I bought it. I'm excited. We'll see what shakes. But right, spring is around the corner. But I think I'm gonna narrate this book about alchemy and then get into another Dolores Cannon read. But we'll see how it goes. Right, we'll do it like we feel it. First and foremost, though, we're going to finish this awesome old book. So good to see you, Jenny. Freaking awesome. Sending you and yours amazing vibrations. So yeah, the arm. I don't know why that's making me think of like weaponry and stuff, but anyways. The mound seems to be the place in which the enemies of the god were believed to have been annihilated. The existence of the mound does not seem to have any special significance in the development of the domain of the falcon, but may be connected with the subsequent event. It is explained that a deity emerged from the mound because danger was approaching. A snake appeared near the domain of the falcon, who was defenseless and, in fact, unprotected while resting on the perch. The divine newcomer in the island of Trampling, which is now extended in size by the Paylands and also has a mound, bears the name HN-NTR, Protector God. This name is known to us from the Edfu records only. It is not obvious from the account of the main cosmogonic record whether this deity might have been one of the gods from the vanished worlds of the Creator. The tradition tells us only that, quote, the protector god came forth thereupon in this place to protect the god within the Wetchesset Neater in the capacity of the Segmeh, Segemeh, end quote. From the fact that this deity is portrayed as an acting god, but in the capacity of another deity who is not represented as a physical personality, we conjecture that the HN-NTR was conceived as a physically real deity. He may have been born in Noon, like the Shebtu, and may have emerged in connection with the appearance of the new terrestrial configuration. This hypothesis will accord with an interpretation of a later date telling us that the primeval mound having been created, the protecting god of the falcon came out of it and he too acted in the capacity of another deity who is obviously a tangible god. The protector god in our story seems to be related to the heater her, or header her. Perhaps he was his offspring, since he is described as the likeness of the radiant one with a face like unto the header her. We suspect that he might reveal himself in the resurrected island and to act in the place of the header her, who was an ancestor at that time, and that his main function was to exercise protection over the successor of the Pian god. Following him, another deity enters on the scene. It is the god of the temple. His original nature is described by the name PTH-NWYT, a mythical name which is known to us only from this narrative. Hence, the god of the temple must also have been a creative power. He too was possibly related to the header her. We are told that he was brought out of noon as the likeness of the radiant one with a face like unto the heater her. The circumstances under which the appearance of these two divine beings occurred are relevant. We are inclined to suggest that their revelation showed the characteristics which might be enshrined in the type of earth created at the end of the period when the Palands of the falcon originated. We know that the primeval mound was believed to be the territory of the ancestor, who is not named in our text, but who might have been an earth god. If this surmise be admissible, it would result that the revelation of the two divine beings was regarded as being the manifestation of the power that was enshrined in the earth of the mound. The god of the temple was most probably a creator. His task in the newly created world might have been to create the protection of the falcon. What is said to have happened thereafter accords with this suggestion. As a consequence of the danger, the protection of the god seems to have been made. An enclosure described as SBHT seems to have been erected. The text is concise. This enclosure, or SBHT, may perhaps have been a simple fence erected around the perch of the falcon. The next stage was the origin of a new kind of water, which in our document is described as the MW water. It appears as though this myth of creation distinguishes the MW water from the primeval water, NWYT, in general. If this view be correct, it would mean that the MW water appeared later, after the terrestrial world was in existence, but when it was still in its primary shape. How this MW water was created is not stated in our document, though the text indicates its creator. It is a deity called Divine of Heart, or NTR-IB. Although this view sounds a little unusual, the only interpretation we can suggest for the sentence is that the Divine of Heart created the water. This MW water seems to have been created for a special purpose and was believed to contain a power which prevented the snake from coming near the sacred domain of the falcon. It is stated that this water was sanctified against the snake. We imagine that this MW water may have formed a circle around the domain of Wetchesset-Neter, perhaps resembling the channel which was made around sacred places later on. At any rate, the narrative alludes to a channel, but unfortunately does not give further information in this respect. The SBHT enclosure, eventually surrounded by the channel of the MW water, may have been the first means by which the protection of the perch against evil was ensured. No description is given of the constructing of this enclosure. This enclosure seems to be connected with the revelation of the two protecting deities, whose main function in the island seems to be to protect the sacred place and its divine occupier. It may be suggested that the origin of the first enclosure that was ever made in the island was believed to be the material projection of their presence. Three important facts seem to derive from the description of this event. The SBHT enclosure appears as the name of the earliest type of enclosing wall that was made in Egypt around the sacred place in the dim past. We cannot verify this information elsewhere, and we do not know to what real type this SBHT enclosure may correspond. We imagine it as a mere fence fashioned from light material. It should be borne in mind that the SBHT enclosure is said to have originated at the end of various episodes of creation of the Earth. This circumstance suggests that its construction might have been interpreted as an act of creation equal in its significance to the other act of creation which occurred earlier in the island. Consequently, it was included in the in the order of the creation of the Paylands. Consequently, it was included in the order of the creation of the Paylands. The two Shebtu may have been responsible for its construction because they are the only acting creators on the site. Hence, the idea inherent in the description of these events is that the first constructed enclosure of the god resulted from the orders of the creation of the earth. Its origin is the reflection and projection of a creating power who revealed himself as a god. The two projecting deities, the Shebtu, seem to have acted at the end of all these events jointly with the divine of heart, who is referred to at the very beginning of this myth and whose companions were these two Shebtu. Excuse me. It appears that it was believed that the intervention of their presumed leader completed the normal course of all the acts through which the first sacred place in the history of the Falcon's domain reached its final stage. It is likely that the emergence of the primeval mound ends the myth about the creation of the actual lands needed for the domains of the Falcon, and that the history of their development closes with the revelation of the two projecting deities and with what resulted from their presence in the island. We incline to the opinion that the creation of the Falcon's domain as evolving from the former realm of the DRTY Falcons who rested on the DD pillars was completed in the setting up of the SBHT enclosure and in the digging of the channel. There will be some doubts whether this form of a primitive sacred place consisting of a vegetable seat of a god and surrounded by a mere fence of reeds was erected on the freshly created plots of land, the Paylands, or whether this temple construction was made around the original perch in the Wedgeset Neater. Since the description of the creation of the sacred place of the god within the Payland, as will be seen below, does not refer to a fence described as SBHT, we may assume that the sacred place of such an aspect was made in the original Wedgeset Neater, the first domain created on the ground of the ancestral territory. Page 144. Pajo, good to see you. Paradox Fossils. Welcome, everyone. Awesome. Mr. Hugh, very good. Good to see you all. The following part of the narrative seems to bring us to the original field of reeds, apparently to a spot within it other than that in which the perch was. We suspect that there is a clear allusion to another myth of creation about the primeval domains of the Falcon. This myth might have originated in another place, and might, in the original version of the sacred book of the specification of the sacred mounds, have primarily formed a part independent of the first myth, which we have already analyzed. The presumably second myth about the origin of the primeval domain of the Falcon might have been simply juxtaposed to the first myth only later, perhaps even in the Edfu editing. In the study of the second myth, several facts appear which make this surmise inherently possible. Thus, for instance, the perch in the domain of Wedgeset Neater was in existence, but is not mentioned in the second part of the Edfu narrative. Several Paylands already existed together with the primeval mound, but there is no reference to them. We suppose that the second part of the first Edfu cosmogonical record might have been based on another ideological background and be, consequently, the result of a tradition which originated in a place other than that in which the tradition concerning the Jeba perch was at home. Nevertheless, one feature is common to both, and this is precisely the idea of the revivification which, too, underlies the events recorded in the second part of the first Edfu record. This tells us about the resurrection of the domain of the Earth God. In our exposition of facts concerning the island of trampling in its first period, we suggested that it seems that two primitive domains might have existed in it side by side. The order of events in the creation of the primeval domain of the falcon seems to indicate another possible interpretation. We suspect that the name Wetchesset may be of general significance and that it may describe any place in which, on a ground of an earlier sacred place, a new sacred domain started. For in this creation story, the same name applies to two originally distinct primeval areas, each of which shows an entirely different physical aspect. The Edfu account gives a clear idea of the belief that the Wetchesset was the place in which the earth god described as the earth maker dwelt, and that an early domain of such a nature and such a name was the starting point in the constitution of the first cultist place of the falcon. While comparing the way in which these two earlier domains were revivified and restored, we find further arguments that there are two distinctly different trends of thought, and consequently two originally independent myths. If these deductions be accepted, it will follow that the theory concerning the origin of sacred lands, which we have attempted to reconstruct, might originally have formed a single myth about the resurrection of the domain of the Pian god and his divine fellows. In short, the deities who dwelt on the Didi pillars. This myth included, so far as we are aware from the Edfu evidence, the construction of a place of worship of the ancestors, which is described as proceeding step by step with the origin and growth of the first phase of the place, the creation of the first sacred domain of the falcon. Supposing that this was the Egyptian idea, we can attempt to outline the final aspect of the first primeval realm of the falcon in which his cult was established, and which existed side by side with the place of worship of the ancestors during the second era of the primeval age of gods. It appears that the center of the first sacred realm was a cultist place of the ancestors that is said to have borne the name Wetchesset. In its physical aspect, this domain, Newt, was in fact the replica of an earlier sacred place which consisted of a small number of supports made from vegetable material such as reed, and to which, in this tradition, the form of the Didi pillar was given. These original supports were substituted by a slip of reed named Jeba Perch. Along and around the boundary of this ancestral domain, there were created lands in which the domains of the new god were founded thereafter. The period of their creation seems to have ended in the origin of the mound. Then followed the consolidation of the protection of the early domain. During this period, there seems to have originated the first constructed enclosure. The Edfu records did not enable us to state where these domains existed, which, according to this tradition, were sacred to the falcon. It is a possibility that in these lines there is recorded the history of Damanhur, or Damanhur, which is capital D and then Amanhur, or other sacred places of the falcon Horus in the Delta. No authority can be cited to support such a hypothesis, and this research is outside the framework of our study. Nevertheless, it is tempting to imagine that the sacred realm of such an aspect and extent, as is described in our record, may have represented for the Egyptians of historical times the sacred mound of the primeval age. This hypothesis will accord with the significance of the title of the sacred book which we are studying, and is supported by the secondary name of the island of trampling, the sacred mound of Hiter. The second name does not occur in the main record, but appears in a text which must have been written in accord with it some time later in historical times. We conclude that the first part of the Edfu record preserves most notably an originally single myth about the origin of the domains of the Winged One. These paylands may have been the sacred domains on which the tradition looked on, or rather, let's try that again. These paylands may have been the sacred domains on which the tradition looked as on the first sacred mound of the falcon. It may, consequently, be suggested that the following part of the same record yields the mythological history of another sacred mound of the primeval age. We have already pointed out that the sentence coming close, or coming close? Coming close to the field of reeds of Wetchusett Neater that restores the ancestors, which that's all italicized, appears to have originally been the title of a single myth. This myth, too, might have been adopted and used as an explanation of the origin of the primeval domains of the falcon. The Edfu tradition, however, looks upon this event and all the succeeding actions as following the three acts of creation through which the sacred world of the Winged One came into existence. In the general history of the origin of the domains of the falcon, therefore, all that follows presents the fourth phase of their creation. And this fourth phase of creation involved, again, an act of recreation of what once had existed in the past but had died. Full circle. Oh my gosh. Code, you just crossed my mind, and I just thought, man, I wonder if I'm going to see Code again in one of these. Dude, I miss you. Oh my gosh. Yay. Oh my gosh. Yes. Welcome in, dude. Oh my goodness. Juicy reads, my friend. So many juicy reads. Holy majoli. Awesome. Oh, dude. Big love to you. Oh my goodness. So freaking cool. Dude, I wonder if I had that thought because you just came in or something. Dude, freaking awesome. Yum. Yay! Oh my gosh, this is so cool. Oh my gosh. Too long, too good. I feel like I got a little piece of. Whew! All right. Awesome. Okay. Where am I at? But had died. Okay. No accurate description is given of the arrival of the divine beings in this field of reed, and the text does not tell us to whom the word sh, to come close, refers. This word may refer to the arrival of the two Shebtu, who, as will be seen, are the main acting power in the new episode of creation. Before the early sacred domain had been recreated, the narrative tells us about the revelation of a god who is not mentioned in the beginning of the episode. This deity is Tannin, the Lord of Creation. He is said to have appeared on the scene as a projection after the Shebtu pronounced a spell. The occurrence of the word PTH, or Lord of Creation, unknown to the first part of this creation story, may indicate that in this part of the Edfu narrative, there are enshrined fragments of another tradition. The revelation of Tannin as a protective divine power perhaps made it possible for the former domain of the Earthmaker to be recreated and made similar to its former state. If this be correct, Tannin would appear here in a position equal to that of the Ka at the beginning of the recreation of the domain of the DDW pillars. That's the first time I saw that W there. It is worthy of note that in both of these traditions, the creation was initiated by the revelation of the earth god. It should be remembered that here also the scene is placed in the field of reeds. The fact would attest the important part that a field of reeds played in the origin of any sacred place. Code. Dude, we should link for a chat. I've been learning so much stuff and we should really talk about it. Like, I mean, like about the pyramids and like the vibrations and the energies and like telluric currents and like the Stonehenge and like different stones that like I just like expansive things that I've been learning about. I'm really excited about it. Yeah, plus I came across this thing like the 11th harmonic, which is like a it's some kind of it's like C3. Um I saw this video of it just like breaking down breaking down cancer cells, just killing them right off. Right? Backwoods. Oh my gosh, this is like a night of reunions, dudes. This is so cool. Welcome everybody. Yeah. That pyramid was a machine, an energy machine. And it like, oh my God. Okay, we should talk about that if you feel like it, you know? Anyways, that stuff's juicy. Sound. Okay. I don't know where I am. Pause. I don't know where I am. Framework of our study. Sacred mode for the heater hurt. Son of a gun. I don't. Hey, JMD. Okay, wait. Yeah, I said, yeah. Maybe we should just have like a chat about that sometime. But like, I'm totally lost now. I just like got the good vibes shaking, right? Yeah. Did I read this part? I don't know. Delta. I think I am farther than that. Oh yeah, DDW. We're into this DDW, which is like this deity is Tannin, the Lord of Creation, or PHT. Okay, so I read that. Origin of any sacred place. Oh, the fact would attest the important part that a field of reeds played in the origin of any sacred place. Something just fell down. In this part of the narrative, there is no allusion to the Pian god, nor to the Ka, who were the prominent personalities of the first creation story. This is another and valuable argument to support our hypothesis that the Edfu tradition here associated two originally distinct myths. The picture of the field of reeds of Wetchesset Neder, which is preserved in the second part of the record, affords further support for the theory that the creation of the domain of the falcon was, in the first place, an act of resurrection through which an earlier sacred world came to its former state. This description of the field of reeds is of importance because it exemplifies the conception of the nature of a place in which a sacred domain was created at the dawn of the history. Emphasis is again laid on the idea of the ancestor in connection with the creator and creation. This field of Wetchesset Neder is pictured as a place of ancestral tradition which was in decay. In the preceding chapter, we have attempted to outline the appearance of the sacred domain which was believed to have existed there prior to the arrival of Tannin. We suggest that this spot was regarded as the very place in which the earth god dwelt during the first period of the island's existence. This domain was believed to have been destroyed when the island was attacked by the snake, or by a snake. We are told that the first act in the restoration of the domain of the Earthmaker followed at once the revelation of Tannin. The shelter, NHT, was erected as a protection of the symbols of the creating powers which are described as the member of the progenitor. The narrative indicates the dimensions of this shelter, which are 5 by 15 cubits. We suspect that at this point, the Edfu record might give us an idea of the extent of primitive shrines that might once have existed in Egypt. The erection of this shelter is described as being the first act of creation, which the creators completed in the field of reeds. For this reason, we suggest that this act may be linked with the planting of the perch. If this be correct, we see here, in spite of the similarity of the general thought, a definite hint of an entirely different tradition from that which underlies the myth already analyzed. The next stage is described as constructing what was planned. The use of the words HWS and WD apostrophe, like little apostrophe, confirms the idea of a reconstruction. It has been suggested in the preceding chapter that the Egyptians believed that the Earthmaker founded a mansion for himself and that this mansion also housed his companions. It is likely that this statement, entering that which was in decay by the god of the temple, in italics, describes the state in which the mansion of the Earthmaker was found after the creators entered into this area. There is much that is similar to the account of the restoration of the domain of the DDW pillars. We have here the two Shebtu, whom we suppose to be responsible for the erection of the NHT shelter, then the god of the temple, who is said to have attended the construction of the SBHT enclosure. It seems that it was believed that when the god of the temple entered the ground of the former dwelling place of the god, or rather of the earth god, that site was revivified, and as a result, the mansion of Isden was restored. The close link with the event described as the planting of the perch is furthermore borne out by the nature of the land in which these actions of restoration happened. This was again a land of ancestral tradition in which an earth god was believed to have dwelt. Only a place with such a tradition could make it safe for a new sacred domain to be founded there. The action of restoration is here again described as a decisive step in the forthcoming period of creation. Oh my gosh, Angel Fishy! Yay! Welcome in, dude! Code, you know how you said you thought this was the year for the free energy? That's what that pyramid was, man. Harnessing like actual earth energies and that whole 369 Tesla energy, like vibrations. Oh man, so juicy. I put my thumb on my spot this time. So good to see you, Angel. So good to see you. Another point of similarity with the myth about the domain in Wetchesset is that the original inhabitants of the mansion of Isden, though mentioned in the narrative, are never said to be present as physically real deities. It is highly probable that they had there the same function as the ancestral DRTY falcons in the first Wetchesset Neater. When the mansion of Isden was reconstructed, the falcon seems to have entered into it. No description is given of what may have been his resting place within this enclosure. What, however, appears quite certain is that he was told by Tannen of the way in which this domain was destroyed. Tannen seems to be the prominent personality in the following episodes, which we suppose come to pass within the mansion of Isden. He created from staffs protecting symbols. He created from staffs protecting symbols and giving them the names of the companions of the Earthmaker. The creation of the protection appears to be a preliminary act of a ceremony by virtue of which the falcon became the successor of the Earthmaker. It is explained that Tanin presented the falcon with sacred symbols such as the spear described as the Great White, the Didi pillar, and that which is described as the likeness of the front of the god. Meantime, yet another symbol was brought in the presence of the god of the temple. The narrative describes an episode of offering symbols by a god who was a creator to another god. This act shows, in its general significance, a striking resemblance to the episode of presenting the IHT by the Lord of the Ring, or not Ring, the Lord of the Wing, to the falcon resting on the perch. In dealing with the first mythical episode, we suggested that it has every appearance of being an act by virtue of which the falcon was equated with the deceased ruler. It may therefore be suggested that this episode performed on the grounds of the earth god had the same consequence. In receiving the emblems of the Earthmaker, the falcon might have been believed to assume the power of the former ruler of this mansion. He might have been regarded as his successor then. These emblems, together with the two staffs in which the companions of the earth god were embodied, ensured the protection of the falcon in his new home. The performance of the ceremony and its completion appears as the principal means that resurrected the sanctity of the destroyed domain of the earth god. We have no detailed account of how the shelter was erected and the mansion of Isden was resurrected. As an act of creation, it can be compared with the description of the planting of the perch. Nevertheless, we imagine it as a simple courtyard open to the sky within which the most sacred part was marked out by the shelter. It is likely, though it is not clearly stated in the text, that the Shebtu were responsible for all these actions of construction and reconstruction. At the stage, there is no allusion to other creators. At that stage, there is no allusion to other creators of sacred places who could do so. The only difference that can be noted from the first narrative is the presence of the god of the temple, who does not appear in the first event at all, but seems to intervene in the process of recreation. One could not read these two episodes of recreation without being struck by the strongly pronounced parallelism of ideas as far as the function of the mansion of Isden and the significance of all the actions are concerned. They are the same as those which we have I didn't understand that. They are the same as those which we have in the first myth about the domain of the Didi pillars, only projected into and applied to another sacred place. In both narratives, we have an account of the physical work of restoration, which was followed by the importance. Mother of pearls, that's not what it says. In both narratives, we have an account of the physical work of restoration, which was followed by the performance of a symbolic episode, and which was the presenting of special offerings by one god to another. The result was that the domain of the earth god was revivified and was brought to its former state. In both myths, the resurrected domain was the nucleus of the creation of new lands for other sacred domains. In the first myth, the Shebtu performed all the actions of creation resulting from the revivification of an earlier sacred domain. Here, too, they are the main actors in the forthcoming stage of creation, which would, consequently, appear as the direct outcome of the restoration of the mansion of Isden. It has been noticed that, with the exception of the falcon and the acting creators, there appeared divine beings completely unknown to the first part of this record. Moreover, the structures in this second Wetchesset Neater show somewhat more advanced and developed features than the domain of the Didi pillars. The difference in the physical appearance of these two early sacred domains is enough to show that the first Edfu record enshrines traditions of two early cultist places. I can feel that, man. We suspect that the mythological situation which we have been analyzing discloses a tradition which originated in another place, but was associated with the idea of the revivification of a former state. These facts will enhance the general significance of the Wetchesnator in the history of the early Egyptian cultist places. They will show that the tradition concerning the resurrection of the domain of Wetchesnator, though unidentified by archaeological evidence, must have been familiar to several early cultist places and was modified to suit local beliefs. Thus, it might happen that this myth was taken over by a place consecrated to the falcon and was used as an explanation of the origin of the first enclosure of the falcon in the primeval age. Here, once again, the prominent thought of the episode of foundation is that the first enclosure of the falcon was erected on the grounds of an earlier sacred domain, which was that of the earth god. I'm going to cough. Un momento, por favor. Well, I hope I got that phlegm out, dude. It felt like a death rattle in my chest. No bueno, no bueno. Okay. Mm. Oh, much better. In the fifth stage, excuse me, in the fifth stage in the history of the primeval domains of the falcon, according to the Edfu tradition, new lands needed for further sacred places of the falcon were created. These are again the paylands that were created from the mansion of Isden. In the description of their origin, no hint is made of any organic work which the Shebtu would complete. We are told that following the ceremony in which the falcon was instituted in the rulership, the god of the temple summoned the two Shebtu and apparently instructed them in the manner of creating. At this point, we can see a difference in that the first myth does not speak of the god of the temple as being present in the island when the Paylands began to emerge. We see here a clear allusion to another conception of the act of creation of the Paylands. Since the Shebtu created the Paylands, but only in the second part of the first record are they said to have been instructed in the manner of creating, it is evident that the description of the fifth period in the creation of the Falcon's domain discloses a tradition that originally was distinct from the first episode. These facts accord with our hypothesis that the myth about the resurrection of the domain of the Earthmaker might well primarily have been an independent myth which, at a definite moment, was adopted and adapted for the interpretation of the origin of Falcon's domain. This moment is never and nowhere indicated. The meaning of the instructions, which were believed to have been issued by the god of the temple before the start of the new phase of creation of the earth, can only be guessed at, for they are recorded in the most enigmatic way, and no parallel text can be cited. What appears to be quite certain is that the Shebtu were inducted in the creative activity described here as NHP, to fashion, and that they were sent to visit a certain place named as the BWHNM. As has been said, the meaning of this name remains obscure. We imagine that all that come to pass in this BWHNM, which eventually might have been a place near the enclosure of the earth god. Oh, wait, that was one sentence. We imagine that all that came to pass in this BWHNM, which eventually might have been a place near the enclosure of the earth god. The Shebtu proceeded to specify the IHT, or substances, at a definite moment, which is indicated in the record as the time in which the arm was invoked by the praise of Re. Although there is one common point with the first episode of creation of the Paylands, the allusion to the arm does not occur in the first myth. The event described may have been what the Egyptians regarded as a rite of creation, which began with the worship of the Creator, who is here represented by the symbol of the arm. This, then, as has been suggested, was the physical form of the elementary creative elementary creative power, which was believed to have been concealed in the ground of the enclosure. The immediate outcome of this event renders the suggested interpretation reasonably possible. The result of this action was the emergence of the Palans, which we imagine appearing around and along the field of Wetchesset Neater, where the mansions of the earth god was. This description of the beginning of the creation is undoubtedly more accurate than that of the first myth, and is of prime importance for the Egyptian idea of how the creative forces acted on the emergence of the Palans. We suspect that we have here an extensive account of what is described in the first myth only as the appearing of the Palans. The adoration of the symbol representing the power which was believed to have brought into existence the plots of land was regarded as being the prerequisite to effect the emergence of the Palans. The expression SW-IHT-T squiggly to endue the substances with power does not occur here, and moreover, the nature of the IHT, which undoubtedly must have played an important part in this episode, is not determined. We suspect that these IHT might represent the symbols of the lands to be created. The use of the word DM to name or to specify confirms the importance of the word in this action of creation. We imagine that the Shebtu, while naming the IHT, indicated the lands to be created, and thus, through this procedure, they made it possible for the lands to emerge from the primeval waters. The text proceeds to give a long list of names introduced by the word P, tiny parenthesis, YW, or Palans. There is much that is similar to the first myth, and we have no doubt that this part of the Edfu narrative yields exactly the same situation. We think that these names are the sacred spells which the Shebtu pronounced at the adoration of the arm by the praise of Re. These names may be considered as revealing the proper sense of this kind of rite. It would follow that these sacred names were pronounced over the IHT, or substances, and that consequently, this act meant the giving of names to the IHT. These IHT, or substances, having been named, caused the earth hidden beneath the waters to emerge. If our reconstruction of this mythical situation be correct, we suggest that this part of the narration reveals the characteristics of the rite of creation that was believed to have been performed in the BWHNM at the dawn of history. This BWHNM might have been the place in which the IHT, or substances, were stored, and so the nucleus of the creation of lands, of which the nature and functions are strictly defined. Undoubtedly, these newly created lands had the same function as in the first instance, and were the grounds for the foundation of the Falcon's domains. They appear to have been originally domains subsidiary to the mansion of Isden in the field of Wetchesset Neater. We suggest that each name listed in the record is that of a single payland, which was made into a sacred domain of the Falcon. This part of the record does not, however, reveal anything which can help to describe the eventual development of all these paylands. Another difficult point is that the narrative does not permit us to discern whether the Jeba perch was created in these paylands or whether an HWT mansion was constructed there, imitating and repeatedly reenacting the mansion of the Earth Maker. This list of names of the paylands suggests that in it there may be preserved the names of the original sacred domains of the Falcon. Since all these domains are projected into a mythical plane, it follows that these names may be those of sacred places earlier than historical times. This is, of course, a speculation for which, at present, there is no clear textual or archaeological evidence. This period of creation also led to the appearance of the Hywer, or the H tiny parenthesis Y dash WR, or the Great Primeval Mound. So this period of creation also led to the appearance of the Great Primeval Mound. Its emergence presents or represents the sixth era in the history of the primeval domain of the falcon. An era. What makes an era? Little Red, good to see you. Welcome in. Oh my gosh. Awesome, man. What a good night this is. Trace, oh my gosh, baby Oliver. Thanks for sending me those messages. I'm telling you, such upliftment. I can't believe how big he got. What? Isn't that how it works, though? So freaking cool. Welcome, everybody. Man, I love you guys. Isn't life awesome? Isn't life so awesome? Man, so cool. I love you guys. Man, what a blessing. Wow, it's already been an hour and 15 minutes. How much left in this chapter? I knew it was a long one. Eh, we're not so far out. Okay, off we go. Oh, man. Yeah. Voynich, I love you, man. So awesome. Welcome. Dude, Voynich, this is freaking cool. Everybody here is amazing. I love you guys. So, we have seen that the center of this creation is in this episode fundamentally different from the domain of the DD pillars, and that other deities, unknown to the first narrative, came on the scene. The actual creators, however, are the same, and the manner in which the new domains were created shows obvious affinities with what is described in the first myth. It is therefore suggested that this episode of creation discloses the history of the origin of another, the sacred mound of the primeval age, which was believed to be sacred to the falcon. In the stages of the creation of the falcon's domain, the seventh phase is apparently an act of recreation, and this event seems to bring us once again back to the original island. This part of the narrative bears the title HHBW-HNM, or Visiting the BW-HNM, an expression known from the account of the fifth phase of the creation of the falcon's primeval domain. Apparently, another allusion is made to the same mythical place. As we have seen, the interpretation of the name BW-HNM meets with difficulties, and there is no authority to clarify the explanation only very tentatively suggested in our summaries. HNM is a problematic word. It may be used here as an infinitive quality, or rather, it may be used here as an infinitive qualifying the word BW, which is in fact a very frequent construction in our texts. On the other hand, however, HNM may be a noun. If so, it is to be taken either as HNM, and then in parentheses it says T, with the meaning well or cistern, or as the masculine noun HNM, water, juicy. Interesting. The latter is frequent in the administrative documents of New Kingdom. It appears in the same documents as a formative of place names. In this respect, attention should be drawn to an instance in a stela from Abydos, which speaks of, wow, I've just been learning a bit about Abydos. Okay, drawn to an instance in a stela from Abydos, which speaks of a HNM, which is in Abydos. Furthermore, we find on 2 wine jars from El Amarna. It's a pretty name. El Amarna. Inscriptions with a mention of a source of wine described as P squiggly dash HNM N IW capital N or capital M and then SD, which is the water of the island Meshed. Island Meshed or island meshed. Probably meshed. Island meshed. The last instance appears to be relevant to our problem, since in both cases we can see a close connection between the HNM and an island. Our record is, however, silent about the location of this place and about its eventual connection with the two other sacred spots. The description preserved tells us only that this BW-HNM enshrined the place of WA, which we may conjecture was his original resting place. Nevertheless, it is significant that here, as well as in the account of the creation of the Paylands that departed from the enclosure of the Earthmaker, we meet the same deities, Tannin and the two Shebtu. If we recall that the beginning of the fifth phase of the creation of the Falcon's domain, Tannin emerged after the Shebtu recited a spell, it may very tentatively be suggested that this BWHNM was a place of water, perhaps a still water within the island. The text does not state that Tannin would emerge in the midst of noon, and that from there he reached the island. This BWHNM might have been perhaps equivalent to the Hermopolitan pool in the island of creation. Perhaps this BWHNM was the place from which the subterranean water welled out, whereupon the creative powers might eventually have been brought out of the noon, in the first instance, Tannin. Although the text does not say it, we imagine that perhaps the water coming out of this well brought him to the field of reed, the Wetjaset Neater. We know that the Shebtu, too, suddenly emerged near the edges of the island of creation, but the narrative does not indicate the exact place from which they would emerge. As this account refers to a place described as the BW squiggly, the place of Wa, we are tempted to suggest that they dwelt also in this primeval well before they landed in the dead domain of the Pian god. We know from the account of the fifth phase of creation that the Shebtu visited this BWHNM before they started to create the actual land of the Paylands. It may therefore be surmised that this primeval spring brought out not only the creative powers, but also the constituent elements in the creation of the earth, the IHT. This is inevitably a hypothesis for which there is no textual evidence. If, however, we assume it, it would follow that this BWHNM was regarded as being the place of origin and the realm of the creative powers acting in the second period of the creation of the earth. The Edfu account would seem to disclose how the Egyptians imagined that this particular place was made into a sacred domain. It is highly probable that this part of the first record introduces us to a part of the primeval island other than the field of the Wetjaset Neater, and in spite of the similarity of the general ideas that underlie the story, the account makes us familiar with traditions and beliefs distinctly different from the two previous ones. We notice a fundamental difference in one of the essential features of this BWHNM. In the description of the appearance of the BWHNM, no mention is made of reeds, but on the contrary, the willow is said to be its center. This appears as a starting point for an attempt to reconstruct, at least theoretically, the physical aspect of the BWHNM. The picture of a willow standing near a well gives a clear idea of a primitive sacred place as it might once have existed in Egypt. Dude, the willow is my astrology tree. For us Taurians out there, just so you know. Sweet. Man, I used to love to go there. There's this park near my house in California where I grew up. I used to go down there and they had willow trees, and I just make willow hats. I loved those hats that I would make. Yeah, it's cool. So the picture of a willow standing near a well gives a clear idea of a primitive sacred place as it might have once existed in Egypt. We imagine that it might have been believed that a primeval creative power, after having emerged from the water, could dwell among the branches of a willow, and that there he was adored. What happened around the willow, according to our mythical episode, appears to be another instance, attesting the existence of an earlier sacred place, which for this reason was associated with the island of creation and was believed to have existed there during the first period of its existence. Since the willow is said to have been there when the creators arrived, and no allusion is made to its being planted and growing, it is possible that the Edfu tradition associated with the two preceding accounts, yet another myth about the resurrection of a sacred place, which was in decay and which became the center of creation of lands for new domains. In spite of the differences concerning the concrete aspect of the place, the close parallelism of thought between this story and the two other myths already discussed is apparent. We incline to the opinion that in this part of the first Edfu record, there is enshrined the early history of yet another, the third, sacred mound of the falcon. We think that we have here beliefs. Yeah, that's right. We think that we have here beliefs in another sacred place linked with the idea of the revivification of another earlier sacred domain, which was brought to death. This myth, too, was adopted for the explanation of the origin of the primeval domain of the falcon. Excuse me. It seems to result from this account that when the two Shebtu arrived in this area, Tannen revealed himself. Afterward, they came to a place described only as a BW, or place. Ah, then created, which is A.E., and it's like a god. Ah, then created, again by the mere pronouncing of a name, a sacred domain, the name of which was BWHMR, the place of the throne. This place of the throne seems to be the only place which was believed to have been created there. As far as the rather obscure text permits us to reconstruct the situation, it appears that the willow was included within this place. Some sacred objects were brought in and placed in the presence of the arm. These objects are described as IHT. These IHT may have been the substances already mentioned in connection with the creation of the Paylands, which was performed from the mansion of Isden. This ceremony having been completed, an enclosure, or SBTY, seems to have been erected, which we imagine as surrounding the place of the throne. Subsequently, a new generation of creators appeared on the scene. These are the builder gods, who are unknown to the earlier mythical situation. Perhaps they were responsible for the constructing of this enclosure. What follows is an episode of adoration. The text is, however, silent about the deity who might have been adored, or as to who might have been the eventual performers of this act. The result of all these incidents seems to be the constitution of a domain of which the falcon became the ruler. At this point, we notice a certain resemblance to the two previous accounts of the formation of the sacred domain within the island of creation. It is said that the willow grew radiant, and that subsequently the falcon was uplifted. Hence, this account propounds the idea that the willow was the seat of the first occasion in the cult of the falcon. This seat came into being also on the ground of an earlier sacred domain which needed to be revivified. It was, in fact, revivified at the time when the falcon arrived and settled down on the willow. Consequently, the willow growing radiant was the symbol of resurrection in this creation story. How old, it's so cool. The text alludes to the arm, but does not specify whether this arm was brought by the Shebtu or the site, or rather, that this text alludes to the arm, but does not specify whether this arm was brought by the Shebtu to the site or whether it was concealed in the ground of that place. If the second suggestion be admissible, we have here, once again, convincing evidence that a primitive sacred place was founded on the ground in which a nameless creative power represented by the symbol of the arm was believed to have dwelt. The belief in the arm is already known from the second myth about the Wetjeset-Nieder, and this evidence confirms its significance and importance in the foundation of a sacred place. Another similarity to the first narrative can be seen in the mention of the NHT shelter, which we imagine to have been erected underneath the willow. Then the mention of two deities described as SHM-HR and HD-WR. Both these names are already known from the description of the enclosure of the Earthmaker, and we suppose that we have here the same divine beings, and that they played the same part in this episode as they did before. When the falcon rested on the willow, the protection of the place was the protection of the place was constituted in a way closely resembling the already known order of creation, which involved a magical protection of an early cultist place. The text is unusually obscure, but what appears quite certain is that the protection was constituted by means of symbols. The magical power of protecting was conferred upon them by a giving of names. This account ends in the statement, "to be done according to that which has been done." We suspect that there is only a summary indication of what was believed to follow. There may have been an allusion to the procedures of creation which occurred in the two other early sacred domains after they were brought to a new life. Viewed as a whole, this order of creation, as far as it can be reconstructed from the enigmatic text, recalls the situation known from the history of the domain of the DD pillars, as well as from the episode of the restoration of the mansion of Isden. We have no doubt that we have here the same theory of the recreation and reconstruction of a primitive cultist place, only associated with beliefs and traditions of another sacred place. When this domain was recreated, the falcon again became its supreme lord. We meet here the same creative powers, Tannin and the two Shebtu, then two protecting deities from the earlier stage of existence of this domain. No allusion is made to the other deities who were prominent personalities in the two preceding episodes. Neither the PN god, nor the Ka, nor the god of the temple are mentioned or described as intervening in the process of actions through which the place of the throne came to be a sacred domain of the falcon. This circumstance makes it likely that we have here decisive evidence of yet another third myth about a creation and recreation of a sacred place in the island of the primeval age of gods. The theory that this episode was indeed an act of restoration and reconsecration is supported, in the main, by what is said about the willow. The willow is described as growing verdant after several ceremonies were completed underneath it. Verdant, verdant. Verde, green. We suspect that these episodes had the effect of bringing the willow to a new life. The picture of the willow, therefore, gives a clear allusion to the revivification of what was in decay. A further similarity that can be seen between the place of the throne and the Wetchusett Neater is the part which this place seems to have represented in the subsequent stages of the history of Falcon's domains. It has briefly been pointed out above. It is evident that the domain of the willow, after it was restored, was a nucleus of creation of further grounds for the foundation of the falcon's domains. This last, the eighth phase in the creation of the primeval domains of the falcon, is interpreted in the tradition as evolving from the domain of the place of the throne. In this ultimate stage of creation, two Paylans are said to have come into existence. They bear the name Wetchusett Neater and Jeba, respectively. These two names do not occur in the long list of the Paylans, as mentioned above, but they are identical with the name of the original domain of the island. This circumstance can be purely incidental. On the other hand, these two Paylans, believed to have emerged at the end of a long drawn-out drama of the creation of sacred domains, may have been given these names to commemorate the existence of the very sacred place in which the cult of the falcon had its origin. The description of the origin of the Payland of Wetchusett Neater is detailed and supplements the Egyptian view of the emergence of the plots of lands adjacent to the island of creation. It is stated in the text that the Shebtu were assembled in a place of special nature before the start of a new phase of creation. This place is described as the BW-SW-IHT-T *Im, or the place in which the substances of the earth were endowed with power. No detailed picture of its appearance is preserved. Moreover, this name does not occur in connection with the two previous periods of creation of the Paylands. We are reduced to speculation. We have to remember that in all the three instances known of the beginning of the creation of the Paylands, a sacred domain of an earlier date was revivified and brought to its former state. It is fairly clear from the account that the existence of such a renewed sacred place was regarded as the prerequisite to the performance of the rite of creation through which the Paylands were brought out of Nun. NUN. We may hazard a guess that this BW-SW-IHT-T may have been a special place within the renewed sacred place. There might perhaps be a place in which these IHT-T were kept, and where eventually the rite of endowing with power was performed. This is inevitably somewhat hypothetical, for no relevant text can be cited. If this view, however, be admissible, it would follow that only the place which was destroyed could assume the potentiality of becoming the center of a new creation through the act of revivification, as had been described above. Such an interpretation assumes that in this episode of creation, the name BWSWIHT-T applies to the place of the throne. And the interpretation would appear possible if we recall that at the beginning of this account, allusion is made to some IHT which were brought in, and that a ceremony was performed in front of the arm. We imagine the two Shebtu as being within the place of the throne, and performing the magical rite of SWIHT-T. We suspect that the name BW-SW-IHT-T is only another name of the sacred place described as the BW-HNM. We have attempted to interpret the significance of this place. If we recall its function in the fifth phase of the creation of the Falcon's domain, and then its real nature in the seventh phase, it is highly probable that the creation of the Paylands derived from the BW-HNM. This is, in this seventh phase of creation, the very place that was restored and from which the new creation started. This shows that the place of ancestral tradition was regarded as the real center of creation of the earth, and that the name BWSWIHT-T qualifies the function of the BWHNM. It was therefore believed that only in the place in which the primary creative power rested could the substances of the earth be endowed with power. Doubtless, this last instance of the creation by magical procedure is the most illustrative evidence that is furnished by the Edfu record. If we agree that in all the instances of the word IHT, the same substances are referred to, it is clear that they represent as symbols the lands to be created, because in this account they are defined as the IHT of T squiggly, or Earth. A further important fact that can be deduced from this account is that it sets out clearly that the Egyptians imagined the creation of the earth as a mere emergence of the plots of land from the water. We read in our document that in the meantime, the Shebtu recited the sacred spells. The water gradually receded from the edges of the island, and the actual land of the Payland was brought out. This part of the record is explicit enough to enable us to reconstruct the physical aspect of the Payland and to reveal the Egyptian view of how the freshly emerged earth was made into a sacred domain. It is highly probable that they believed that the creators of the earth made it into a sacred land and made it similar to the original domain of Wetjeset Neder. Mention is made of arriving in a BW-HBBT after the Payland came into existence. The expression BWHBBT occurs only in this third account. Theoretically, the interpretation, the place of the primeval water, may be suggested. We suspect that this name may describe a specific place on the marginal land of the Payland in which the reeds grew. The Shebtu apparently recited further sacred spells. Then the Heter Her is said to have appeared on the scene. What follows has every appearance of being a march of the deities present in the Payland, at which perhaps the image of the Heter Her was carried in front of the procession to a special place within this presumably small area. The place to which this procession led is described as the BWDD, the place of the the place of the DD pillar. We think that in this point lies the essential feature of this creation story. We think that in this point lies the essential feature of this creation story, for this BWDD is described as being equal to the place of the Jeba perch of reed. The DD pillar is not pictured here as a real object which would stand in a definite part of the marginal land. It is highly probable that on the Payland also the DD pillar, as a relic of a sacred domain that once existed but had vanished, determined the very place in which the seat of the falcon, the perch, was to be erected. Therefore, the sanctity of the site and the sacred place of the falcon was once again imparted by what had existed in the past. The perch was again the first thing which was to be created in the Payland. Hence, once again, the perch is the manifestation of the renewed sanctity of the land. One could not read this account without being struck by the close resemblance of events and actions to what had happened on the marginal land of the island when the first Wetchesset was resurrected. The falcon is said to have come thereafter and was lifted up by the reeds. The Payland then received the name Wetchesset. The beginnings of the sacred life in the newly created Payland were thus conceived to be a mere reenactment of the procedures by virtue of which the first sacred domain in this history was constituted. The explanation of the origin of the Payland of Jeba adds in great detail to the picture of the initial phase excuse me, to the initial phase in the life of the primeval domains of the falcon. This second account is in many ways more explicit than the descriptions of the origin of the first sacred place in the Payland of Wetchesset. We imagine that in this first instance, there were repeated all the acts of creation already known from the history of the original domain of Wetchesset. Then the procedures by which the Payland of Wetchesset was created were repeated. The contents of the second Edfu record have every appearance of indicating that the Egyptians believed that any Payland in which the sacred domain of the falcon was to be founded had the same commencement. There was therefore one unique way in which all the primeval domains of the falcon came into existence. In the Payland of Jeba, the falcon seems to have ruled as the child of the Heter Her. The description of the magical rite of creation, as well as that of the emergence of the Payland, are not included in this narrative. The text starts with a greeting formula addressed by the crew to the falcon. Then the speech of the god seems to follow. We incline to the opinion that the god told his crew of the manner in which the ground and his domain too were created. The important fact is that the narrative alludes once more to the reed and describes it as the reed that restores the place in which the DD pillar was. Then the text proceeds to tell us of various actions which the Shebtu were believed to complete there while making the bare land of the Payland into a sacred domain. They are said to have arrived in the field of reeds and performed there a rite of adoration of the DD pillar of the Ka. As a result, the Ka himself seems to have revealed himself and to have instructed the Shebtu how to erect the perch. We find here the same trends of thought as are known from the history of the Paylands of the Wetchesset. The erection of the perch is the chief means to revivify the sacred nature of the Payland. This perch was to be planted in the same place in which the DD pillar formerly stood. In this account, the event of the planting of the perch is recorded in a somewhat modified way. It is stated that the primeval waters became calm. The Shebtu then performed an act, which is described as recalling the substances. No explanation is given of the characteristics of this episode. We think that there is allusion to the same IHT as are known from the preceding episodes of creation, and that the explanation SH_IHT, or the recalling of substances, describes the rites of creation to be performed over the IHT. This ceremony was usually performed before the start of the creation of the earth. Unlike the preceding accounts, this narrative seems to indicate that a ceremony concerning these substances was also included in the procedures of the creation of the resting place of the falcon. Hey, PPR, good to see you, Dustin. Welcome in, Sass. Welcome, everybody. Good stuff. Oh, no, I guess that was just a naturally good time to take a pause since it went a little black and weird and funky. Oh, hey, calm down there. There we go. Oh, okay. We're really close, everyone. The event which follows is similar to what had happened in the other Payland. The Shebtu came close to the edge of the land when the reeds were floating by. When they reached a certain place, they divided the reeds, and a slip of it was planted. This slip of reed then assumed the function of the seat of the falcon, who was uplifted as the lord of the perch, and thereby the land was sanctified. It is clearly stated in this account that after the perch was erected, when the domain of Wetchesset came into existence. Oh no, then, okay, wait. It is clearly stated in this account that after the perch was erected, then the domain of the Wetchesset came into existence. The falcon was greeted, and a silent rite, or SGR, seems to have completed the series of actions by virtue of which the domain of the falcon in the Payland was believed to have been created. What follows is expressed in a very enigmatic way. Nevertheless, it seems that the next episode is concerned with the protection to be set around the perch. This does not occur in the first account. The text seems to allude to a protecting power which was adored and invited to enter into this area. As a result, it is stated that the perch grew bright against evil. Another allusion is made to the divine of heart, who in this connection seems to be described as the overlord of the image. Question mark in parentheses there. It is not clear to whom the word HW, for which we suggest the interpretation image, may refer. The narrative may well allude to the image of one of the ancestral deities which might have been brought to the Payland as the symbols of protection. Perhaps we have here, instead of the image of the he or her, that of the divine of heart. Nevertheless, the mention of the divine of heart is interesting when we recall that he is the first deity mentioned in connection with the emergence of the Shebtu on the edges of the island. It would appear that at the end of this long drawn out drama of creation of the falcon's domains, the divine heart, or the divine of heart, reappeared on the scene to fulfill the normal course of events. He might assume the same functions as the he or her had in the Payland of the Wetchesset. At the stage of the primeval age in which the sacred domain of the falcon was founded in the Payland of Jeba, the Edfu account of the periods in which the lands for the domains of the successor of the earth god were created comes to an end. The Edfu sources permit us to gain a fairly clear idea of all the stages of creation from which was derived the sacred world. The falcon was believed to rule there in the primeval age. This domain replaced the homeland of the primeval ones and the cultist place of the creator. The Edfu documents give convincing evidence that it was believed that the primeval domain of the falcon were not created in a single action. We can discern 8 stages in the history of their development. Each stage in the creation was basically a restoration, though on a somewhat different scale. of something that had previously existed. Each stage resulted in an increase in size of the island and marked a further step in the formation of the domains of the god who was believed to have succeeded to the creator. In every instance, the creation of the sacred domain proceeded on the same plane. The actual land for the domain was created on the marginal land of the island of creation after this was brought to a new life. On the new piece of earth, a slip of reed was planted, representing the first resting place of the god. The place of the god's seat seems to have been determined by a pre existing object, which is, in this tradition, always the DD pillar. Sanctity was imparted to the falcon's domain by that which had existed in the past. The sacred nature of the place of the god was manifested in the uplifting of the falcon. There was, it seems, only one act by which the actual land of the domain was created, and there was only one act by which this land was sanctified. We have seen that our document yields, in fact, 3 times the beginning of the first cultist place of the falcon, and that in each instance, uh, the commencement of his cult is associated with the resurrection of an earlier sacred domain. Each such domain shows another physical appearance. In this sequence, we have the domain of the DD pillars. On the other hand, the HWT mansion of the Earthmaker, and finally, the domain of which the center was the SBTY enclosure enshrining the willow. Of these, the first, the former domain of the DRTY Falcons, seems to be the most important in the constitution of the Falcon's domain. Primarily, there must have been a single myth about the restoration of the vanished sacred domain, which became the base for the creation of a new sacred world. It is therefore evident that there was a single theory concerning the origin of the later historical domains, and that this tradition was familiar to several cultist places of a remote date. But in the Edfu editing of these myths, all these traditions were regarded as forming a single history of the origin of the falcon's sacred places. The history of the creation of the primeval domains of the falcon comprises three great eras of creation of the Paylands, which departed, all of them, from a pre-existing sacred center. It looks as though the primeval realm of the falcon was pictured as consisting of 3 terrestrial units, each of which was described at a later stage of history as I*T, or sacred mound. While using the Edfu textual evidence, it is possible to sketch out the general appearance of the sacred world that resulted from the various actions of creation that emanated from the original island. The center of the primeval realm of the god seems to have been formed by a cultist place which existed prior in the island, and which, after the island was revivified, assumed the function of a place of worship of the ancestors. Ancestors. These ancestral cultist places seem to be a vital element in the origin and development of the later historical domains. Our document describes 3, of which 2 were within a field of reeds, the Wetchusett Neater and the Mansion of Isden, and the third, the Place of the Throne, around a willow. Each of them was encircled by an enclosure. Each enclosure erected in the island bears another name and must, consequently, have been of another type, but all of them seem to be constructed from light material. Within these enclosures, light material, like light, anyways, I know that I think that they're talking about like light that is like reeds are light, but light, like a flashlight, but within these enclosures of ancestors, the first resting place of the god was erected. On the boundary of these ancestral enclosures, there were, eventually, the paylands of the falcon, in which, at that stage, all that existed was the Jeba perch. From all this evidence, an important fact emerges. Before the actual land of the later historical domains came into existence, the Egyptians believed that there existed centers for worship of the ancestors. Naturally, the question arises, where was the region in which these ancestral cultist places existed together with all the domains said to be sacred to the falcon? Several tentative suggestions can, of course, be made, but we do not claim that the Edfu accounts enshrine the history of the DMJT sacred places of the falcon Horus in the Delta. Boom. We did it. We made it through that big chapter. Oh my goodness. Wow. Juicy, juicy. Detailed. So dang, what a fun night this has been. Thank you, everyone. I am so thankful to see and hang out with everyone that was here with me tonight. And tomorrow's called Monday. I do believe I'll be going live tomorrow. But we'll see what shakes, right? I intend to, but we'll see how it plays out. So yeah, I'm sending you all so much love and good vibrations. Thank you very much. And thank you, YouTube. Thank you, StreamYard. Thank you, my family. Thank you, God. I love yous. And I hope you have a wonderful start to your week, which is in like 3 minutes here. So it's Monday in 3 minutes. So good to spend time with you guys too. You too. And I love yous. Okay. Until then, mwah, take care of yourselves. Thank you.